Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. I'm your host, CK Sims, and today we are joined by author Willie Handler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, Willie, tell us about yourself. You've written a new book, a book that's been finding great success, and there's a lot behind this book. What's the book about?
The book that I never planned on writing.
Yes.
And never wanted to write, and it's my most successful book, which means I should never listen to myself and just listen to everybody else around me who is telling me, do it. So the book is my attempt at a memoir. And when I say my attempt, it's because it's not what I would call a classic memoir. It's sort of divided into three parts, which is, and part of it is I began wanting to write my parents' story, who are no longer around, but were Holocaust survivors, and also my own upbringing as part of that kind of a household. And then there's a portion of the book that talks about intergenerational trauma, which I learned as I was writing the book that I had. And so what I share with readers is what that really means, at least from my perspective. And that's kind of a summary of how the book is structured.
So what I found really interesting about what you wrote in the form. So every guest writes a form, and as I tell every guest, when they arrive, I don't research the person prior to the interview. And there's a reason for that, because I don't want to be super structured in my interview process. I just want to have a conversation. So I popped over today and I read what you had written. And this writing of your memoir was more than just writing a book for you.
That would be accurate.
Yeah, maybe an understatement, probably.
Yes. Well, yeah, and here's the thing is that the listeners might know it's not my first book. Many people who write this kind of a book, this is the only book they write.
Yes.
And in fact, I was teaching a workshop yesterday evening on memoir writing. But, I have 3 fiction books out. When I tackled this book, when I finally decided I was going to do it, I just approached it like any other book I have ever written. And, it didn't quite work out that way. It was transformational. I often get asked, was it cathartic? No, not at all. It was triggering. So as I was writing it, I'm trying to remember anecdotes and stuff from my past. And I did speak to my siblings as well. But as I start remembering things, all this buried trauma that I have just came rushing out. And it was only a matter of time before I came crashing down. And so this was not like any other book. And I did not even prepare myself. The whole process, I could kill 3 hours just to describe it. But
well, I can imagine, because I'm trying to, when I read that part on your form, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, from a trauma perspective, right? A lot of people will go through life not even recognizing that they have trauma, right? And then they start to say, do the work. Healing is messy. It is not a nice experience. Now, it's a great result in the end, because you come out being more aware of who you are and feeling more centered. But that process is messy. So if you were, let's just say, for lack of a better word, approaching this book sort of cavalier, in the sense as you had your previous book, not prepared for what you were going to unearth from within you. I would imagine there were a lot of really painful surprises that came to the surface.
Oh, yes. And it really, it, and when I say it was transformational, um, I totally changed my view of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I started re examining all my relationships, what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And everything in my life changed. So I use as an opportunity as almost like a reset button. And
Yes.
but I have to tell you, I've been aware of intergenerational trauma for decades. There was a book that came out um, by a social worker named Helen Epstein in New York in 1979. I grabbed that book because it was about children of Holocaust survivors. And
Mm-hmm.
I grabbed that book and I read it, and kind of, I could relate to it, but I always thought I wasn't quite, I wasn't damaged. And the reason was, um, growing up, I guess my defense mechanism was to build a wall around myself. And uh, I didn't let people in. I was not close to people. I was distrustful. I had issues with abandonment and attachment. I still do today. And I kind of just adapted to um, to who I was and what and the trauma I had, and kind of just was able to really keep it, push it aside for decades until I wrote the book, and then boom, it all came out, which is not a good way to do it. Um,
No, especially if you were doing it without, guidance, or without being with the therapist at the time who was helping you move through these things.
and so I knew I was struggling. I was having nightmares that I had when I was younger were coming back, and then what struck me is I signed a contract to have the book published. Well, no, I had signed with a literary agent to have the book published, and suddenly it hit me: people are going to be reading this, and it's all about me. And I'm going to have to stand up in front of people and talk about it without breaking down. And I was freaking out. That's when I went to therapy. So when the therapist came, when I first session with the therapist, why are you here? Well, I'm worried about. I don't feel comfortable about publishing this book, and it's creating a lot of anxiety for me. And so we spoke for about 3 sessions, and then she finally said, all you do is talk about other people. You don't talk about yourself. Hell, I never do that. Um, and then I started to, and then it just kind of, I had one of those sessions where I basically cried through the whole thing. And,
Those are
uh,
the
and then I thought I
best.
was, hey, and I knew nothing about therapy. And I thought
Yeah.
I was cured.
Mhm.
I'm healed. I'm better. And I told her, thanks a lot. We'll see you later. And she says, are you sure? And she says, this is trauma is a long time to recover from. Oh, no, I feel good after that session. And I was back 2 weeks later.
Of course.
I quit another time because, the healing process is very, as you call it, messy. I call it painful.
Yes.
And there was a point where I accused her of making me worse and quit,
Fair.
and
No,
came
that makes sense.
back a week later. Yeah,
You
she
went
was.
back.
Yeah, I kept going back, and she's very patient and very understanding, and just kind of went with it. And now I'm like Basically, I told her, in the last few months, I told her, I'm never leaving you now, because I said, I'm afraid what will happen. So, just so it's not only do I have to deal with the trauma, but I really didn't even understand the therapy process. She actually asked me, she told me to get a book about therapy. And so I read it and going, yeah, okay, no big deal. But it's to actually experience it for the first time was tough, especially for somebody who doesn't talk about themselves. And now my therapist, my new best friend.
Well, this is a part of it, right? So I'm so happy that the first person that you went to go see, you were able to develop that therapeutic alliance with. Because oftentimes this is not the case, right?
Yeah,
That therapeutic alliance, you're going to look at that experience as such a positive way for a long time because it was transformative,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, so you write a book. So your parents were the children of Holocaust survivors,
No, I'm the
or
child of
your
a
parents
Holocaust survivor.
were
They were the
Holocaust?
survivors. They were deeply
Oh,
traumatized.
oh, as you can imagine, without question. So how? Oh gosh. So I'm trying to unpack for a second.
I can kill the airtime
So
with all
they
kinds of things.
survived. I know. I'm sorry. So they went through the Holocaust, came to Canada, met. I'm assuming, perhaps raised a family.
Okay, so um, my father was from Poland,
Okay.
and my mother's from Romania. So their experiences were actually very different, but still very
Mhm.
traumatic. But my father was further traumatized because during the war, he was in a ghetto and he got married in the ghetto because you did not know what was coming. So he got married in the ghetto and had two kids, and they were murdered. So that's a trauma that is very difficult to recover from. And so they met. My mother left for Israel, Palestine. It was Palestine at the time. It was a British mandate. In '46, my father went after Israel became independent, and they met in Israel. And my father did not like sort of what I would call the early pioneer life in Israel, because that's what it was in 1948, 49, 50. And so they immigrated to Canada. And they arrived in 1953 with
Wow.
nothing, really. Nothing. And um,
Had to
and
build
set up
everything
shop
up
here.
from scratch with massive trauma,
Right.
in which they probably, I don't know, but they probably never actually got help for.
There was none. I
Okay.
mean, Holocaust survivors, you hobbled out of the concentration camps, came out of hiding, came out of the forest, and you're stateless. You have nothing, and you're on your own. And there was no, I mean, there was Red Cross and they had aid agencies and the U.S. Army and other armed forces, providing some support, food, and some shelter, whatever. They turned some of the concentration camps into um, uh, a displaced persons camp, which is basically just a refugee camp, and that's and so but there was, and if you needed medical treatment, you received some. I had an uncle who came out of the camps with tuberculosis and was in the sanatorium in Germany for 18 months. But there wasn't much in the way. There was virtually no social services and definitely no mental health services. And so there wasn't anything really until I guess around this started in the 60s. They didn't even recognize the trauma. I mean, PTSD was first, I guess, used label. They labeled people with PTSD in Vietnam War. I think was the first time, but by then they already started to pick up on the fact that there were traumatized people from the war, and we're starting to call it survivor syndrome. So that was the first label, and there were a number of researchers who started looking into them and providing support, but they were literally basically left on their own. And I should add, one of the things that I've done since I published the book was I started working on a second book, not a memoir, but it is a book on intergenerational trauma. And I've interviewed almost 100 descendants of survivors, either children or grandchildren. And I'm in the midst of writing that up. So, and there were some very, very interesting things that sort of came out from those interviews. One of them was that some people were great at burying their trauma. And I heard people say, we had a very happy household. And I'm thinking, lucky you. But some were far worse than my household. And there were people whose parents were psychotic. And I would estimate, because I didn't take that kind of, I didn't capture that kind of statistics, but perhaps 15% of parents were institutionalized at one point because they had a total mental breakdown. But the only treatment available at that time was electroshock therapy. And in particular, one person I spoke to, and it was her grandmother, and this she got, I think, from her dad, that her mother, the grandmother, would shriek and scream for 5-6 hours every night. Every night. She would be cursing in Yiddish, and she was psychotic. And this person told me that her dad said she was the best mom ever. Because when she wasn't like that, she was a very loving and caring woman. And then, who knows what kind of demons came into her head at night, but it was horrible. And so that's the and these people, they didn't get treatment,
which is mind-boggling to me. But I mean, it's not mind-boggling in the sense that I can't believe that they didn't get treatment. I think what's mind-boggling is how they survive. And so you telling me that someone's grandmother, who was perhaps or potentially in a concentration camp, spent 6 or 7 hours in a night screaming. This isn't, it's tragic and it's sad, but at the same time, it's not surprising. What people actually witnessed there, what they saw, loved ones being torn from them, death, all of that stuff, to then the war to be over. And as you said, they're stateless. It's just them on their own to figure out how to live and how to build something. So in my brain, it's just and the whole electrotoxin therapy is mind-boggling to me, because I'm like, okay, so someone's coming from a concentration camp and they're screaming at night, and your only therapy is to
torture them some more.
Essentially, that's exactly what my brain was thinking. And I'm like, it's really hard for me to believe, and it's not to say, I have to be very careful with that statement because I 100% believe in the Holocaust. It's very hard for my brain to comprehend that this could happen somehow, even though we know it.
There's days that I just shake my head. I can't believe it. So no wonder there's Holocaust denial, because I know it happened, and I still can't believe how horrible it was. And I've lived with this every day of my life. I'm not a
The
young kid
Holocaust
anymore.
deniers make me angry.
They're evil.
They really, I think so, to be honest, because I just I don't understand that. Um, I get not being able to comprehend how something so atrocious could happen in our world, which it's like to me, I just can't wrap my mind around the evilness that it would have taken to say start that, but then for people to follow, you know what I mean? Like it's just such a layered
Mm.
sort of thing. So, but
And I've heard, and that's the thing is I've heard so many horrible stories in those interviews that I did. It's a good thing I was in therapy while I was listening to those stories, because um, some of them were very triggering, and I was doing too many and lying to my therapist how many I was doing, because she would not have been happy. I think 1 week I did 8. I just recently told her that, and she goes, "What?" Wait, no. The best reaction was when I told her I was doing this project, and she just looked at me and she goes, "Why? Why would you do that to yourself?" She says, "Do you think it's going to help you?" And I'm going, "No, I'm doing it to help others."
I love that.
And
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. Before the break, we were talking to multi-time author Willie Handler about Out from the Shadows, his book, which is sort of like a memoir, but also like a story of his parents who were Holocaust survivors. He has written 3 fiction books, and this is his first memoir-esque book, because it is a memoir, but not a traditional memoir, I guess, if you will, is how you sort of
yes,
set it up.
what I've told people is that there's a classic type of memoir, but there's lots of variations on it, and I'm going, this it definitely qualifies as a memoir. And sometimes I call it an investigative memoir, because I knew nothing of my parents' story, almost nothing of my parents' story, when I sat down to write it. The first time I tend to write something, I did an 1,800-word blog, which was both my parents' story. That's all I knew, and so part of you know part of the this part of the book describes how I gathered information to write a whole book. So it's a very different kind of book, but it's a very difficult read and quite gripping.
Well, I would imagine that it would be a heavy read for sure,
Yeah.
to sit and read about your pain and the pain of your parents. And you're also working on another book right now that focuses on intergenerational trauma, which is
Right.
going to be probably a very great read for people who don't understand what that is. I want to
Right.
talk to you about something. So this is where I get to be super vulnerable and show you who I am, because I like to be transparent. So as I told you at the beginning of the interview, I don't research people until just before the show. So I went to your website and I started reading your blog. And as I'm reading one of your blog posts, I start to notice some subconscious bias arise. And I'm thinking to myself, hold up a second. What is this bias? What is this that you're feeling right now? And so it was the January 7th, 2025 post. Why has there been an explosion of anti-Semitism in Canada? So this is where I'm going to say who I am. I am privileged in that I am a white male who can live in a bubble. I know that. When I don't like what I see on social media or the news, I tune it out. And I have that ability to do so. So as I'm reading this blog post, I'm noticing little things come up. And I'm trying to challenge myself and say, well, wait a second, is this person, and just for everybody listening, and if I'm making you uncomfortable now, please tell me, I will stop. I just wanted to have this conversation with you.
I'm fine. If I put it in a
Okay.
blog post, I'm going to talk about it.
Okay, perfect. All right, good. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't about to make you uncomfortable. You know, where you list some of the things that are happening in Canada with swastikas everywhere, anti-Semitic incidents happening in Toronto and Montreal. And then there was sort of like almost like like a sense of annoyance or anger in you. And so in my response, what I was noticing, like, why am I annoyed at his annoyance at the current situation? That's what I had to ask myself. And so I think I wanted to talk to you about this because there's one thing that you said in here, especially about this book, is that you believe, because you said you had signed a literary agent, and in this blog you talk about how this literary agent, after October 7th, 2023, decided to drop you.
No, not
Oh,
quite. Not
okay.
quite. He was Jewish, and a couple weeks after October 7th, he didn't give specific reasons, but just said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving the business," and he said, "But all my clients I'm going to pass over to um, other agents in the agency." And I heard from a VP of that agency who said, "Don't worry, I will look after you. We will get your book published." I said, "Great." And she said, "Can you just send me the manuscript so I know what I'm dealing with?" So I emailed her the manuscript I'd say about 4 or 5 weeks later. It was also because it was in the middle of holidays as well. I get an email from her saying, "Well, thank you very much for sending me your manuscript. Um, this does this does not look like a book that I'll be able to um, uh, get a publisher for, or whatever, or something like that, and good luck in the future." So without even trying to see, she just outright dumped me. And I could only conclude that it had to do with the content. And, it was shortly after, October 7th, and there was already an explosion of anti-Semitism. What I didn't understand, and is in that blog post, was that Jewish artists, writers, performers were being canceled left and right. Not because they were supported the war, or just because they were Jewish. And I and so was I angry? I have to tell you, when I very often blog posts, I'm upset about something, I've been triggered, I use it for therapy. It's an additional form of therapy. And my therapists know that. Once in a while I said, "Oh, read this." So that was kind of what was going. And I can tell you that it's like it is everywhere. I actually got a message, I don't know, I think last month, from somebody said, I'm interested in reading your um, your memoir. Can you tell me what your position is about genocide in Gaza? What? Who asked that kind of a question? And do you ask, and like, would you ask a non-Jewish writer whether or not they had a position on Gaza? And I basically said, please don't read my book.
Good. I love that response. So I think what's interesting about this is I mean I know that there were pro-Palestine marches and all of those things. I don't think I was tuned in or aware to the level of anti-Semitism here in North America. Okay, and because bubble, right?
Yeah, I
I live in
understand because I run into the bubble a lot. Um, it's not great in New York, and I have a friend, used to be a friend, and a writing friend who I mentored for a while, and I would be complaining to her about all the anti-Semitism, and she going, "I don't see any." She says, "I'm in New York, I never see any," and I'm going, "Why don't you check out the Columbia campus?" And so, like, it's true. You can live in a bubble and not see it. And she's, "Oh, there's Jewish people in my neighborhood. I don't see anything." Well, she lives in some suburb, whatever, in Jersey.
yeah.
So, and in a bubble, and uh, and so it happens. Kind of that's one of the roles that I've taken on for myself is um, speak out about hate, um, to make people aware about the Holocaust, about how it impacts on not just the survivors but their families, and all those things. That's what I do now. That's what I don't make a living doing it. I just do it. And in fact, uh, this is quite fascinating. I'm kind I'm now in discussions with a woman who, in the 90s, I believe, was in the Heritage Front. You would, as a Canadians, would know that as was the largest white supremacist group in Canada back then. And she left the group, and now it does anti-racism sort of talks, and we're going to probably team up and start doing interviews and talks and things like that.
I
So
love it.
this is my reason they're at her now.
See, and the hate thing is what baffles me. So when this all happens, I mean, I didn't even have a podcast at that point. I started my podcast after this. I didn't speak on the topic for a really long time, and then I think there was something that pissed me off actually, and it was Brene Brown, and the internet was pushing her and just pressuring her to release a statement to identify who she supports, who she doesn't support. And she did do it in I think, February last year, maybe. But the reason she didn't do it before is because she had her mother dying in her house. She was caring for her dying mother. And the whole concept that the world needs to know who you support or how you support really pissed me off, like in a
Yeah.
big way. And I was like, you know what? I'm like, that's first of all, it's nobody's business. Like, of course, you don't want someone to say they support genocide or war or the death of anybody. But so it was just, it really pissed me off. So I did speak on it in one of my podcasts, and all I had to say was this. I'm like, Hamas did to Israel was wrong, and what the Israeli government is doing Palestine is wrong. But keep in mind something: the people of Israel do not represent the actions of their government, no more than we can say, "Hey Trudeau, send aid to this country or don't send aid to this country. That prime minister, that president, going to do what they want to do because they're in power. So for me, all of the people who live in Israel, whether I don't care whether they're for it or against it or whatever, they're human beings.
Right.
And they have hopes and dreams and they have lives. And hate is not the answer. And especially here in North America, like, why would you show Jewish people here in North America hatred? Or why would anybody show Palestinian people here in North America hatred? It
Right.
just makes no sense. Nonsensical to me.
And I didn't really want to talk about the Middle East because it's so polarizing. It's like talking about U.S. politics, and also there's so much misinformation around the history, and there are many, what I'd say, sort of progressive left-wing people who have a total distorted perspective. So I actually wrote a blog post about this as well, which is the entire history of the region, going back to the early 19th century, or the 20th century. So going back over 100 years, because I'm sorry, I went back to biblical times. Excuse me, I went back even farther because because you have two people claiming it's their indigenous homeland, and people are kind of choosing sides on whose indigenous homeland is this. Well, in that blog post, I explain whose it is. It's both.
Oh, I love that answer.
But it is both.
I would agree with you. I feel like they both have claims to the land. So why can't there be peacefulness in that? Why?
Well,
I don't understand the history enough. I don't understand.
That blog post really it's about, how long is that post? It's one of my longest ones, and it really talks about how the Palestinian leadership really dropped the ball.
What do you know about when you wrote the post?
Yeah, very recently. Just a second. It will be. It looks like February the 13th.
This past February 13th?
Yeah, that last week. Last week I wrote it.
I don't see anything since January.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I stopped using. I should mention to everybody, I stopped using the blog on my website and have moved to Substack.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I have that.
Since you asked me for my information about my social media information, since that time I've moved my newsletter and blog to Substack and incorporated 3 subscriber lists into one.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to grab that information and we'll provide it to everybody that's going to be listening.
Right.
If you could just say one thing to everybody that's watching right now who's either pro whatever side they want to be, what would that be?
It's my normal message, which is like, hate doesn't resolve anything. You may be able to, in destroying those who you hate, you destroy yourself as well. That humanity is not going to survive based on hate. And so people need to find a way to coexist. And that's not the only region in the world where hate exists, but it's 77 years old. It actually goes back even further. There was a reason why the British finally ran out of Palestine. They couldn't take it anymore. They were basically stuck in between 2 warring factions, and it hasn't changed a bit. Who's right? Who's wrong? They both are. But they don't. But there's no leadership to come up with a workable solution. The leaders that exist now don't have that mindset. The Israelis have given up on peace. They've given up. They they attempted it on several occasions. There was Oslo Accord, there was Camp David Accord, where Palestinians were offered um, at least the start of what would eventually be a homeland, and they walked. And what followed was, in both cases, an intifada. And so that's and so part of the problem is that there are many Palestinians, not all, but too many, that don't want a two-state solution. They want to replace Israel with a Palestinian state. Now, how is that going to happen? I mean, what are they smoking?
Now, would you think that some Israelis are of the same mindset?
Yes, absolutely. And there are Israelis when President Trump. Why are we talking about the Middle East? Anyways, there were those when President Trump came out with his incredible solution, which was to just move all the Palestinians out of Gaza so that he could build some hotels. Um, there were Israelis going, yes, yes, that's a great solution. It's not going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. But yes, so we got into politics. But it just came to the point where I wanted to discuss how when I was reading that blog post, I had some bias that I had to deal with, that I had to work on.
Right. Yeah, no, I
And I
understand.
want you to recognize that you probably have bias when you're talking about these topics or when you hear
Yes.
things that are, say, about the Holocaust or about Jews in current state, right? Because I think that it was also surprising to me to see that there has been a 670% increase in anti-Semitic rhetoric in Canada. And like, that shocks me because to me, Canada is a welcoming and safe place. I know that we have our problems. Every country does. But, you know what I mean? So I think that was one of the things that really just
Well,
kind of spoke to me. So,
and people should know my grandsons, they go to a Jewish private school, and there's been a police car parked in front of the school for a year and a half. And
that's
and this is Canada. There was a day back in 2023, late in 2023, where there was some kind of public announcement about there was going to be a day of protest around the world. My grandsons went to the school that day. There were only 40 kids in the school because parents were too terrified to send their kids to school that day because they thought that something horrible could happen. And people don't realize it. Again, you live in a bubble, but um, we've been walking on eggshells for a year and a half now. And most of us think it's a permanent thing, and it's not going to subside. This is it's the new normal.
I hope that it subsides because I feel as though we're looking like people just need to use their common sense here, for one thing. What the Israeli government does is not Canadian citizens or American citizens or immigrants to North America's fault anyway. Like that logic is completely flawed and idiotic. I'm sorry, but it is. The same way, though, if we look at just current events, what Trump's doing in the US right now doesn't represent all Americans everywhere. And so attacking someone just because they're an American, because their leader is on some sort of rampage, there's nothing logical about it. You're not using your common sense. So if you're listening to my show, and I know I don't have a massive audience, but like, think, people. Like, why would you want any people ever in your country to be afraid, to walk on eggshells, to feel like they're under attack because of the actions of a government that's on the other side of the world? Just think about it. Just use your mind and have some sense. The book,
But that is what anti-Semitism is. That's what it
but
is.
so essentially what we're saying
In
is
other words, in my perspective, it's the Middle East is an excuse to persecute Jews.
so you're saying that the people who are trying to persecute Jews are persecuting them more openly because they have a
Okay,
rational reason to do so
I,
now.
I and I want to clarify that anybody who's pro-Palestinian is not an anti-Semite. But
I
if
would
you
agree with that.
right, but if you're pro-Hamas, yes, if you support terrorism, there's something wrong with you. Um, and so and but many and the problem is that the pro-Palestinian rallies are a mix of
Yes.
people who truly want to support a Palestinian state, which if you read that post I had, probably is never going to happen now. Though I'm not saying it shouldn't, it's just I don't see it. And then there are haters in there, and they're
Yeah.
clearly haters. I remember I saw this coming back in 2021. There was a minor kind of blow up between Gaza and Israel that lasted, I don't know, about 10 days or so, maybe a week, something, not long. And there was no invasion. They were just hitting themselves back and forth. And protests blew up then. That was the first
I remember
really, though it's been building, but that was the first one where it was kind of really bad. And I remember some 80-year-old Holocaust survivor was beaten up. And I'm going like, that's hate. That's just hate.
But it is hate. There's no other word for it. It's
No.
idiocracy and it's hate. You're not using your mind. You're just hating at that point. It's nonsensical. I remember this actually because I remember being at my friend's apartment in downtown Montreal and hearing a massive commotion and looking down from the 20th floor and seeing a pro-Palestine march. Now, I'm not against anybody being pro-Palestine, as we've established here. I'm pro-life. I want, and not,
Not that kind of pro life.
yeah, I'm pro-anti-war. I want no war, no hate. Can we just find common ground and be civil with each other and love each other and love our differences and embrace our differences and just be what we are, just simply human, right across the board. That's what I am. So yeah, the hate, man. I hope the hate will dissipate, but we'll see. We don't know, right? We can only hope and
No,
talk, have stories and open commentary about it, and
I'm pessimistic. And
that's fair. I think you have right to be.
yeah, and um, I just think that there's so much misinformation out there, which is sort of feeding it. Which is again why I'm here, why I'm speaking out. I'm not advocating for Israel. They know how to do that on their own.
Yeah.
And but I am speaking about anti-Semitism, other forms of hate, and I don't agree with Islamophobia, and and as well, I want to preserve the memory of the Holocaust because it seems to be fading from people's memory, and it's not that long ago.
It's
And
on fading from mine. I can tell you
and
that. Not that I was alive when it happened, but it's the
what really bothers me, and I know a lot of uh, people in my community, is that the way that people loosely use the term Nazi. Everybody's a Nazi. If you don't agree with the person, they're a Nazi. And every leader that you don't like is another Hitler. And everything's a genocide. And it's kind of trivializing the Holocaust. And it really is because um, National Socialism was the foundation. Wasn't a, it's not not every fascist is a Nazi. Every
No.
Nazi is a fascist, but National Socialism was based um, on social Darwinism and 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 racial stereotyping and it that's what the basis of genocide was. The Holocaust was that there were inferior races, and the very bottom of that was Jews. And so when you call somebody a Nazi, they're just a fascist. They're unless they actually have, to me, unless they have uh, they've adopted Nazi ideology and ready to build gas chambers or something similar, they're not Nazis. They're just bad people.
I think and I hadn't thought about the dilution of the Holocaust. Cited it before, but I think where it boils down to is just a general ignorance of not knowing what to call such atrocity other than something that they're already familiar with. But when they see someone like Trump or Elon Musk, that sort of thing, they're not registering, say, fascist. They're registering Nazi because Nazi was evil.
No, they insist that this is a repeat of the 1930s. But Nazism didn't start in the 1930s. It started in the 20s. Right?
Yes.
And so they miss a step, which is a critical step, which is the ideology behind the movement. What is Elon Musk's ideology? Is just accumulating wealth at anyone's expense. That's all it is. And he's not a nice person, but does he support murdering people? I haven't heard anything from. I haven't heard anything that comes out. I haven't heard the speeches about eradicating certain race or ethnic group. Nothing like that. Or from the president of the United States. Oh, he doesn't like certain groups and wants to throw them out of the country. But throwing them out of the country is not the same as sending them to gas chambers.
Yeah. I see your point. And thank you for sharing that.
And so that's how you trivialize the Holocaust, because the Holocaust was is unique in the history of mankind, where it was such a dark period. Hopefully it never happens again. And that's sort of the gold standard for horrible. And seems like everybody seems to think everything is equal to that. Well, it's not. And more and more people seem to be accepting that we're in another period leading to potentially another Holocaust. And very intelligent people are arguing with me. It's not, that's what I'm dealing with. When Trump talks about setting up detention camps, people say they think it's just another concentration camps. Well, the U.S. had detention camps during World War II. They weren't gassing anybody. They weren't right. They're not I don't agree with them, but it's not the same as the Nazi concentration camps.
I think I love the thought process that you just brought me through, because so there's like surface level sort of similarities, but the severity is unmatched. There's nothing happening in the world right now that looks anything like
nothing like it. But there's horrible things going on, nonetheless.
Of course, absolutely. But I get what you're saying, and I think I agree with what you're saying in the sense that what we're seeing right now is dark times and some evil, but it does not hold a flame to what happened in the 50s and 30s and onwards.
And people understand that even Jewish people during the Holocaust couldn't believe that the Nazis were, Germans were capable of doing what they did. They didn't even believe it. And I heard it so many times. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you try and get away? We had no clue that we couldn't imagine they were going to do. The reputation that Germans had, they were very civilized.
Do you think, let me ask you a question now, and I'm being mindful of the time, but do you think that that's where some of the fear's coming from, though? Like, case in point of what you just said, there were Jews during the Holocaust that had no idea that the Germans were capable of doing what they did. So could that be where some of that fear and anxiety is coming from? Is where we're looking at the current situation as not being anything like what happened then, but could it be that there are underlying currents that we do not
But
see?
but sort of the difference is Hitler was very clear what he went on to do. In January 31st, 1933, he stood up in the Reichstag and made a speech about um, eliminating all Jews in Europe. And he was saying that over and over and over again. He was teaching kids in school that they were vermin and they needed to be destroyed. I mean, it wasn't, but the Jewish reaction was, despite all the messaging that was going on, nah, that couldn't happen. No way. Well, and some believed it and ran. Um, and others, I know of a survivor. There was a good friend of my mother. She was also from Romania. And I remember her saying that her father was looking to leave Romania in 1936. And he traveled to Cuba. And he decided, no, it was not a good idea to move the family here because the kids couldn't get a good Jewish education. So they remained. Um, much of her family was destroyed. And the interesting thing is, after the war, she actually left and went to Cuba, and she stayed until the revolution, and then came to Canada. So, people had opportunities to go and didn't. So, it's an interest. It's an interest. Making a move is a big deal. And if you were German, the German government extorted you in order to get a visa out. And so you basically had to hand over your business and all your possessions. And so if you weren't wealthy enough, you couldn't even buy your way out. But they encouraged that.
Crazy times.
Yeah.
And we're in
I
crazy
know
times.
way too much about the Holocaust than I want to.
Well, we definitely need to preserve those memories, and we need to preserve those stories, because if we ever want to prevent anything even remotely similar from ever happening again, the story needs to be told. It needs to be shared widely and talked about. So, Out of the Shadows, it is called, sorry, I know there's where did it go? So, Out of the Shadows, Growing Up with Holocaust Survivor Parents by Willie Handler. You can pick it up on Amazon. Is it in paperback and ebook?
Right, and hardcover.
And hardcover. Okay, perfect. You can also take a look at williehandler.com. Is the website still a good
I
place
still
to
have a
go?
website, but I'm no longer putting stuff on the blog. I will actually be putting a notice up on the blog. I was just thinking about it this morning about directing people to Substack, although all the subscribers to that blog have been transferred already. But so
Okay.
I just to let people know that I won't be updating the blog anymore. One of the things I should actually point out in the memoir is that the story of my family's experience of the Holocaust is really written. I've sort of inserted them into the whole story of the Holocaust and World War II. And so, because someone once told me the best way to teach history is about people's personal stories, and the best way to learn about people is from their history. And so I integrated my family story with the war in the backdrop. And so there's a lot of really good information about what happened during that time and how it impacted on my family.
Definitely worth a read for sure. And then also, if you head over to the website, you can see Willie's grandson,
Ooh,
who is a budding author as well, Mr. Jordan. And he has written a book as well.
two.
Yes, Save the Day the Superheroes Saved the World and the Day Brian Dominated the World.
Yes,
So you can check
he
that out.
says it's a series.
It's a series. Okay, so yeah, so this could be a long career, a long storied career. And then we'll make sure that the Substack for Mr. Handler's blog is in the description of this podcast. So I'm going to get you to send that to me if you don't mind.
Right.
So we can include that to everybody. And thank you so much for having this wonderful conversation with me today. It's definitely a conversation worth having, allowing me to be vulnerable and talk about my bubble and some of the things that I struggled with when I'm reading your blog posts. But
If you ever need help getting out of that bubble, I'll lend a hand.
perfect. Sometimes the bubble is just for mental health preservation,
Hey, I
right?
do the same thing.
Yes. So I thank you so much for being here. I wish you the very best.
Thank you. My pleasure talking to you.
Yes, and for everybody at home, get out there and live your wildest dreams. And I think the main takeaway today is we are not experiencing the Holocaust right now or anything similar to it.
But a lot of hate.
Yes, a lot of hate. So don't lead with hate and think before you do. All right, take care, everyone.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@ccsims.com or visit ccsims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.